Okay, greetings everybody. I'm Catherine Moynihan. I'm a trustee of the College of Law Practice Management and also AVP of Legal Management Services at the Association of Corporate Counsel. And I'm so appreciative of everyone joining us today to talk about closing the firm and client communications gaps. When one of my fellow trustees asked me to organize a session as part of this Futures Forum series, there was an interest in making sure that we tapped into the in-house corporate legal experience. And I had recently read the study that Brad Blickstein had conducted in collaboration with the Legal Value Network. Actually, it was two studies. Brad will tell you about that compare perspectives of corporate and law firm ops folks. And I thought that would be great fodder for conversation. And so, Brad, if you'll take us to the next slide, I will just mention who it is that we have here to participate in the conversation today. So besides Brad Blickstein, whom I've just mentioned, we have Chris Endy, who is Chief Value Officer at Goulston and Stores. He's also one of the founders of the Legal Value Network and was a key person behind the studies we're going to speak about today. In addition, Reese Arrowsmith, who heads up legal ops at Campbell Soup, Lucy Bosley, principal of Inno Law Group. Lucy also used to be in-house both at Microsoft and Snowflake. Joe Milkoff, who's VP of Litigation and Risk at FedEx Ground. Joe Otterstetter, who's Assistant GC for Enterprise Operations at 3M. And Bob Taylor, who's now Managing Director with Deloitte's Legal Business Services. And Bob and I have known everybody through their participation in ACC Legal Operations. Bob used to be in-house as well at Liberty Mutual. And the third category of speaker here is you. In keeping with the culture of the College of Law Practice Management, we are aware that there are many people with expertise and knowledge from many facets of the legal ecosystem. So we do hope that those of you joining us today will participate in the conversation as well. So Brad, let me turn it over to you to share the findings and we'll go from there.
Great, thanks, Catherine. I'd like to start just by explaining what we did here from a survey and data perspective. So as I think many of you might know that I've been working on the Law Department Operations Survey. We're working on our 14th annual edition of that. And it became apparent to us over the last few years that we're seeing a trend where there are pricing and project management folks at law firms who feel a lot like the obverse of legal ops professionals in-house. And right around the time we were thinking about that, we started talking to Chris Endy from Legal Value Network and Keith Mazarek from Legal Value Network and their organizations. And we decided to collaborate on a survey of those people. And we liked that idea a lot. We felt like there's not a lot known about the legal pricing and project management folks in the marketplace. But if there's anything that we did that I think was really inspired on this thing, was we decided to ask a bunch of questions of those folks that we've been asking of legal operations professionals in-house for years. So, which gives us sort of a comparison between, in many instances, I think we had 40 questions like that, between how law departments view things and how law firms view the same things. So it's a counterpart, as we say, to the Law Department Operations Survey. And today we're going to talk about a lot of things. I hope we all talk about a lot of things, but we're going to start with a series of data points that we picked up from the survey, which enable us to have this conversation about the communications and really the communication gap between law firms and law departments at the professional level, right? So we're really talking about legal ops people and pricing and project management people. In this instance, not so much in-house counsel and law firm engagement partners or other lawyers. So if I can take 30 seconds real quick, I do want to thank our advisory board for the survey. I just feel, they've helped us put this thing together. So we want to make sure they get they get some props. Also, our sponsors, these organizations took a little bet on us to put forth a nice product with their name on it as well. So if you have I'll be as brusque as to say, if you have the opportunity to do business with any of these folks, please do. And if you're if you are an organization like these organizations that are just interested in getting involved, just let us know that too. So we want to start with a polling question. And Debbie, I think we need, here we go. It's a simple question. Just where do you sit in the legal services ecosystem? Are you in-house? Are you at a law firm? Are you at a service provider? Are you at a tech company or something else? So if you can take a minute or two to answer that question. I guess, Debbie, you'll let us know when we seem to have a preponderance of responses, maybe?
Alrighty.
Cool.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share the results, Debbie? All right.
Cool. Okay. So some folks from in-house, large law firm audience here. And I mean, I don't think any of us are going to be surprised by by that result. So let's move on or start with the first data point for discussion. So just from a formatting standpoint, with Chris's help, I will explain sort of what we were thinking here and what the question is, and then Catherine will take over and discuss and lead a discussion amongst really, I hope, all of us around what it means and what the impact is. And then we'll do that a few different times as we have a few different data points. So this first one we asked for in the law firms, we asked, do you make a strong effort to understand the problems that your clients face? And almost all of them said that they do, that they make a strong effort. But we asked the legal ops people, do your outside counsel generally make strong efforts to understand the problems you face? And only a little more than 50% believe that they do. So we're seeing a pretty big disconnect here between how strong an effort the firms think they make versus the perspective of the legal ops people who don't feel like it's nearly as pervasive.
I guess I'll just jump in briefly here before I kick it back over to Catherine. One of the things I wanted to mention on this question, in terms of just, really highlighting the value of the survey. I think for any of us who've been in, whether it's a law firm or corporate legal department, you can get caught up in your own little world, talking to people who are in your little sphere. And I'll be the first to admit, when I get in a room with a bunch of folks from law firms, it's really easy to sort of, complain about clients and, clients are just this and clients are this, that. And then, when I was on the client side, it was amazing. I was like, wow, the same thing is happening, right? You get in a group of people from legal ops with clients, you think about law firms, right? And I think, when we saw the results of this question, Brad, I remember thinking like, wow, I would bet that law firm folks would be shocked to see this. And the fact that they don't know this is really concerning. But if you asked a bunch of law firm people, like, do you think your clients believe that you really do a good job understanding the problem? Of course we do. Like, that's what we do. That's the core of what we do, is like counselors, right? So I think this to me just highlights sort of the disconnect in general on the communication, and why it's so important to get everybody together in a forum like this and more forums like this to sort of talk about it and identify the disconnects and figure out how we get past it and lead to solutions. So
yeah,
a little long-winded overarching intro, but Catherine, I'll kick it over to you.
Not long-winded at all, Chris. Thank you. So I want to ask the panel first to think about what effective efforts to understand the problems clients face look like. Can any of you just volunteer to give me an example of good practice or good behavior? Because I'm working on a theory here that maybe the disconnect is that the firm folks are making incorrect assumptions about what good behavior looks like in this regard. So anyone got a favorable example to share?
So I can give an example, Catherine. So just as a reminder, Bob Taylor, I'm at Deloitte now, but I was at Liberty Mutual for 25 years. And, at Liberty Mutual, we hire a lot of lawyers, right? And one of the things that struck me by this question is that I think the lawyers feel like a lot of times they're saying, well, we fully understand the legal issues and we're solving the legal problems, right, that our clients need to be faced. I think where the in-house folks would like them also to focus or have equal understanding is the business issues that are being faced or the business problems behind the legal issues. And, I think that law firms in general are fairly good at that. But one of the ways that we tried to close that gap at Liberty Mutual was by inviting in key firms to hear from our executives and to hear from our leadership, not just in legal, but across our organization about what our organization was doing, how we were growing, what our growth strategy was, something about our financials. And so it just gave the law firms a greater context for the work that they were doing and an understanding of what our leadership's motivations were so that they could align their work more carefully as they went forward solving our legal problems.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. I mean, that's obviously an example of a really good practice that clients should make note of, right? Holding sessions. Don't just, expect them to go look at your website and your public disclosures and think that that's going to be sufficient, because those executives' perspectives are so helpful. So anyone want to add something about firm effort to understand the problems clients face?
Catherine, it's Joe. With FedEx, the one thing I might add to what Bob's talking about, and I think he's exactly right about these engagement sessions, is we have an annual summit with all of our we call them outside service providers because it's beyond just the law firms. It's other legal service providers that we engage. And in addition to having that piece where I and my boss and some of our business partners explain where the business is going, we have breakout sessions. And the idea there is that the firms educate each other. We have a series of regional firms that do trucking liability cases, and we expect them to help each other get better in that space. And I think them learning from each other helps them to understand the importance that we place on that, kind of the rising sea lifts all boats for all of our firms.
Mm-hmm. Reese, you wanted to add something, I think.
Yeah, I'm surprised by even 94% of firms saying that they think that they make an effort to understand clients' problems. And my example of why is a few years ago, I was asked to speak at a global firm partner conference. There were hundreds of partners there, and it was really focused on the in-house world and how in-house requirements are changing and what they need to be aware of. But as part of that discussion, they kept asking me questions, and it was things like, I have a case where, what should I do? And about halfway through those questions, I finally started saying, I hope these aren't on our matters, because I want you to be calling. I can't give you an answer. It depends on, to Bob's original point and Joe's comments, it depends on that business and that business unit's strategy that the answers may be different. And my guidance to law firms generally is, and to our outside counsel, when you have questions like that, no matter how painful it may be, because well, let me start there. You need to pick up the phone and call the in-house lawyer and ask them those questions. And the one thing I was left with, because I started probing, why aren't you asking? And of course, no one said this, but I was left with to some degree, I think law firms are expected to have all the answers and don't like asking so many questions. But it goes both ways. I, of course, as soon as I got back, I sat down with primarily our litigators. They're the biggest users of outside counsel at Campbell's, and said, hey, we've got a communication problem here. And of course, they all said, no, we don't. We communicate great. And I said, no. It was clear to me that we need to do a much better job of opening the lines of communication. But it really was telling. And then this survey just kind of exemplified it. So my only advice and request would be to our outside counsel friends, when you impress upon your lawyers to call and ask questions, and if they're not getting the answers, someone like myself and say, hey, I need help.
And can I add to that, Catherine? I'd say, Reese, what's I would add, to be very blunt and tactical from the law firm side, make sure that the clients know they're not going to be charged for this. And shame on them if they are charging. I mean, right, nobody's looking at the bills line by line. We all know that, not to that extent and that detail. So that extra reach out, it comes with anxiety. I know when I was in-house, right, it's like, obviously if you call me, I expect them to pay for that. But even when extra call to the client, to the firm from in-house, I'd say, hey, you need some more information to do your job well. I don't expect to be charged for this conversation. And yes, bring in 3 other associates to hear this because this will help them deliver. But I think that core feeling of the clock ticking, the money every time there's communications, it's definitely an impediment. It has to be just an open conversation if you want real trusted advisor relationships, true ones.
Definitely the clock ticking part of the problem, but a really good embedded suggestion here is to ask for the additional context off the clock, right? So as you can tell, lots more that can be said, but there is more gold in this treasure trove. So Brad, why don't we move to the next one?
Sure. So we asked, and this is exactly what we're talking about, right? We asked the law firm, how often do your clients provide you feedback about how well you're doing? And we asked the legal ops folks, how often do you ask, or how often are you asked for feedback? And the good news is that both sides are aligned here. The bad news is that they are aligned in agreement that it's not good, that they are neither being asked for or providing good feedback.
And I actually want to acknowledge a really interesting point in the chat. I think it originally came, I'm losing track, from Gordon, about lawyers' low resistance and that potentially being part of the problem here. Gordon, do you want to go off mute and just elaborate at all?
Sure, if you like. It's just that there is some work around lawyers typically being very task-oriented and have low resilience, and I think it's awkward for a high-priced lawyer to ask a client questions. Most partner lawyers are very reluctant to expose their ignorance, which is exactly what we're talking about. The only way to learn about your client is to ask them questions about their business strategy, who's behind this, and who's actually making the decision at the business level. Beyond the GC, and good lawyers are willing to put themselves at risk by doing that. But I think there is some reason to say that on average, the psychological profile tends to limit lawyers, legal service provider lawyers, from doing that. And maybe firms should select for people that have high resilience and good soft skills and the ability to have difficult conversations and provide some training around that. But, that's my dream.
But order, right?
To try, yes.
Yeah. Well, and Dan Robert Rudiman chimed in, I thought, helpfully, that there are, of course, roles, particularly around the feedback in law firms. And I think that that's a really good practice. And I also think that this is an area, and this is where I want to go back to the panel and drawing on your in-house experience. I will point to some conversations we had in the prep about how getting and giving feedback gets easier the more you do it. It's right. You get accustomed to it. And Joe Otterstetter, I see you nodding there. Could you please comment?
Sure, of course. A couple of thoughts. First of all, one of the root causes about lack of feedback is simply time. You're dealing with busy people on both the inside and outside providers who don't want to take time to pause and to deliver the feedback. Secondly, it's just hard. These are typically unpleasant conversations. They're difficult. I know I've tried to get colleagues to give feedback so that I can collect it. I do think it helps to have an intermediary or broker, but when I was managing counsel at 3M, one of the things that struck me is how few firms actually wanted feedback and asked for it. It was rare to get it. one of the hacks, and I think to the comment in the chat, I think systems and processes will help. And Pat Lamb, who's on the call, taught me about the importance of after action assessments. If you do it while the wounds are still open, you can have the conversations more productively. I would also say that nobody likes to be criticized, especially lawyers. We tend to be a somewhat thin-skinned lot, but everybody wants to get better. So if we apply the Marshall Goldsmith feed forward concept, instead of telling me how badly I did, tell me how I could get better and make your experience more satisfying as a client. That would be, I think, a more useful approach.
I love that comment, Joe, and I would just build on that to say that if you want your outside counsel to get better, you ought to give them feedback on how to do that. So if you're expecting them to change and get better, it just won't happen, magically. You actually have to tell them how you want the behavior to change. And so, I would say, and anybody who has like teenage kids, you get what you tolerate, right? So if you tolerate certain behavior from your firms, right, that's what you're going to get. And if you give them feedback about certain things that are important to you, they tend to focus on that. And so, I would just say, you don't have to communicate on every single case or every single week or every month, but maybe a quarterly, kind of review on performance and how they're doing. The other, a little bit of a hack, Catherine, that we used at Liberty Mutual was to anonymously force rank the firms that we were using on like cases in similar jurisdictions to show their outcomes. Nothing improves behavior or gets firms more competitive than seeing how they're doing relative to peers in the same jurisdiction and telling them what the important KPIs that you are measuring for those firms. Because a lot of the firms that I get feedback from said, we'd be happy to change, but we weren't really sure what those things were that were exactly important to you. And if you express what those KPIs are, then you can manage the firms to that.
Wow, Bob, where were you when at the last ACC Legal Ops Conference, the Exchange, Reese and Joe Milkoff and others were talking about measuring outcomes and then and taking action on that. Could do an entirely additional session on that. I would love to. Anyone want to add on to this point? I know we have a poll question coming up about this.
Catherine,
Do you want to go?
I have a question really for some of our panelists and other folks who have experience outside outside law firms around this, because there's one thing I learned raising my kids is that, and this is more of a softer approach, a soft skills approach compared to Bob's sort of data and after action approach. But one thing I learned raising my kids is that asking them how school went today is a great way to not find out how school went today. And, better to say, what book are you reading in English? Do you like that book? What do you, and more specific questions, I guess. And are there better questions to ask in an informal feedback request than how am I doing? Which seems like a really hard question to answer, and one that probably, if you're the least bit thin-skinned, you don't want answered in that context, really. What should outside counsel or can outside counsel ask that can get a better result? Or what have you asked if you've been outside?
Brad, I'll be happy to jump in. I think they need to start with not how am I doing, because exactly to your point, everything's fine. And then there's a lot of quiet passive aggressiveness going on down the hall and commiseration internally with why things aren't fine. And that is exactly what happens, by the way. There's a frustration and, it just doesn't get through to the firm. I think the firms need to approach from a more self-critical question perspective of what could have gone better. And they have to do the precision questioning. They have to really ask, start from there, assume things weren't perfect. And that's reality. Things aren't perfect. They never can be. So I would want to hear that. What could have gone better? Is there anything we could have done differently that would have resulted in greater value? Do you feel that we went above and beyond the specific task you assigned to us, right? That kind of precision question I would love to have heard when I was in-house, and when I was at a firm, we weren't quite at the practice of doing that, to be honest, right? That would have been kind of a shocking, like, why did you ask that? Especially as a mid-level associate next to a partner going, what are you thinking? So it's it's a culture change to be ready to receive the answers that you're asking. And that's anti-lawyer. I never ask a question you don't know the answer to. So for a litigator to ask that question would be a little scary.
Yeah.
Just my
Lucy,
2 cents.
Gordon here. I actually thank you for that. My thought is, given how we're all sensitive to criticism, really you should focus on what's going well, what should we do more of, how do we do more of what you like. You'll end up finding out about the gaps, but there's so much more energy in a conversation about what's working for you and what we could do more of. What did you like about the last section of work, and you get more energy on both sides, because otherwise you get into the difficult, awkward conversations that we've just talked about, how difficult it is for most lawyers on both sides of the relationship to be able to conduct. But
Yeah.
And I think you're talking about the sandwich, all right? I mean, you're talking about the sandwich, which I totally agree with. I think that's a tactic. But once you get to the middle of the sandwich, let's hear the precision question. So you're right.
Yeah.
Let's start with the Wonder Bread happy goodness on top, but you kind of got to get to the specifics if you really want to know.
Yeah. Hey, I'm glad Pat went off mute, because I was going to invoke Pat, from whom I learned the what went well and what to take a look at framework for the hot wash. Pat, go ahead.
So I'm a big fan of candor in discussions, but you can't. I don't think you can go to a customer and say, I'm going to put this all on you. You tell me what we need to do better or what we did wrong. I think you have to do your own very candid, very self-critical assessment of your team's performance, and share that with the customer and say, I'd like to get your feedback on how we've assessed ourselves. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are there things that we can be doing better so next time you don't suffer any concerns that you might have suffered this time? This is feedback from customers is a gift, because what you're trying to do is strengthen a relationship. And the only way you're going to strengthen it is to get better and better at what you do for that customer. Because if you don't, it's like, okay, we've got a relationship, right? But they don't treat me as anything special. So, at each matter, each time we did a significant motion, right? At the end of a meeting, right? I mean, there are lots of ways to raise it. But you gotta communicate to people that I am sincerely interested, and I'm going to be responsive to whatever input you provide. And if you're not being responsive to that input, then I think you're foolish, right?
Yeah, it's a really good point. The notion of presenting in a framework, here's some things that we've already identified, and then you're demonstrating that you do have some resilience, right? And you're interested in being constructive. So much more opportunity there, but Brad, why don't you go to the next? I want to make sure there are only like 5 or 6 findings, I think, folks. So let's just go to the next polling question, and then to the next finding.
This is a simple yes, no question. Does your organization consistently communicate expectations and performance measures, or have them communicated to you if you're an outside provider, as part of onboarding and/or annual reviews, sort of in a formal way? Yes or no. Yes or no. So Bob's nodding. Bob did that.
I like participating polls.
That was pretty quick to answer. So Debbie, why don't you go ahead and share? Great.
So if you recall the last slide, that was about 65-35 the other way. So this group is better than average, much better than average on that particular issue.
Yeah, I will say that when we did this informal poll with a bunch of in-house legal ops people, the results were abysmal. And ACC has done a study on this. 18% do this. So
good.
Room for improvement.
And
This
Catherine,
is one of the
one note there too. I'm sorry, Brad. Just one quick note. I think there's definitely something to be said about the difference from the answers received from legal ops professionals versus the answers from the lawyers managing the relationships and managing the work at the firm.
Fair.
I think what we're seeing is as the legal ops profession continues to evolve and grow, they're growing in parallel with their legal counterparts in-house. And that comes with lots of the challenges, right? That we're realizing that regardless of the rise of legal ops and the rise in interest of doing this better, there are still old habits that are breaking, hard to break. So it is interesting, I think, to compare the answers from the kind of licensing, practicing lawyers in-house versus somebody in a legal ops role. I would just say there could be something there.
And that's for sure the case. To be fair, what we're comparing here is the legal ops professionals on the client side to the, let's broadly call them legal ops professionals at the firm side, right? So those are really good questions that I don't have answers to.
Yeah. No, just a point.
Yeah.
I'll just pile on for 1 second, Lucy, to your comment. I'm a little skeptical on this one that there's that many yeses, because here's why I say that. Like, it's one thing to communicate expectations and to send a list or a gigantic document of guidelines. It's another thing to actually live them. And boy, oh boy, I got to tell you, I'm not sure how many people really live them. I, had the good fortune of working on, some bill review processes and managed services in my time. And I was blown away by the number of organizations when you dug in and said, okay, great. Well, here's this particular provision in your guidelines. How do you want to, enforce that? Or what do you think? Oh, no, we don't care about that one. Skip. Okay, next. Like, oh, we don't care about that one. Skip. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, who put this thing together? Like, and you did start to believe that there were cases. I'm being a little flip, so apologies, but there were cases where people just, you grab the best in breed, so to speak, gigundous policy, you throw it out there. And law firms, I will tell you, are consistently guessing with, okay, of this 200-page document, what do you really care about? Because I'm pretty sure you don't mean in all circumstances, don't bring more than one person, to a trial. Like, I'm sure there are times when you want to have a so I think there's a difference between communicating expectations and communicating truly the expectations that you believe and you care about versus just saying the document across the transom.
Yeah, you care about what you measure. So that's why you need to tell the firms what you're measuring. I agree with you, Chris, 100% on that whole thing.
Right. That's actually a great segue for us, Bob, because one of the ways that firms measure is through, departments measure is through outside counsel guidelines. And this is actually, I think, maybe my favorite data point in the whole survey, because we've for years asked legal ops professionals, you ever fired a firm because they ignore your instructions on billing guidelines? And this is a pretty consistent response. 40% say that they've done that they fired firms for that issue. Then we asked the law firms, and as far as they're concerned, none of them have ever been fired for non-compliance with outside counsel guidelines. And something's amiss here, right? Like if the clients are firing firms and the firms aren't getting fired, the big question is what's going on. I have some thoughts, but I know Chris, you do too, and others about what this might be.
Yeah, I'll just say one word. It's sort of the classic, the ghosting, right? Like, nobody actually calls and says, we're firing you. We just stop sending you work over time, and it's not quite as direct as it should be. So that's sort of my very quick general take on this one.
I know we talked about this in the prep session, and I think, at least for us, we've de-emphasized the billing guidelines. It's certainly not a 200-page document, but it's really a governing tool for how you bill us and how we do the simple blocking and tackling of the relationship. To us, what's a lot more meaningful are the KPIs and both the quantitative and qualitative feedback that we're getting in quarterly business reviews. And I will say that feedback has led to us actually having that conversation and pulling work from firms and explicitly tying it to that. But my answer would be that I disagree. I would say we have never fired a firm for violating the billing guidelines that I could point to.
Reese?
It's funny you say that. I'm not sure we actually, it's been a while. I would say we have fired firms, not so much billing guidelines, but just overall outside counsel guidelines compliance, whether you put that into the billing bucket. I do think this has been my experience. We have certainly fired firms for a number of things. To Bill's comment and to Chris's comment, I think one of the challenges in being upfront and saying you're fired is there's two types of firing. One is a material misstep where we actually move matters and you know you've been fired. It is clearly communicated, which we have done. We've done multiple times. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's common, but when it happens, we do address it and move matters. We're not afraid to move matters. We similarly, I think there's a scenario where, okay, maybe you're just not following outside billing guidelines or the guidelines generally, and or there's missteps. We keep existing matters with you, but we decide not to send you new cases. And that's hard to have a conversation that you're fired because we want you to put everything into the existing cases you have. And it makes it a little more of a tap dance through that scenario. I don't know if others have seen similar companies.
Yeah, I mean, of course, the dilemma about that is that, and it just goes back to the last point about giving feedback, that ideally you're calling the strikes before you call the batter out, right? And but that's a really interesting point about the sort of timing issues. And I think that on the other hand, if we really expect law firms to improve their performance in delivering the value that we're seeking and complying in ways that are important, then bad on in-house, anyone in-house who's ultimately, just ghosting a law firm, because that just is sort of denigrating the profession.
Yeah.
Bob, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just chime in real quick. I think Sam makes a good point, in the chat that, it's probably a contributing factor, but not always like the, factor. It's usually one of several things that are probably not going particularly well. And, everybody else on the panel, I generally agree with you. The majority of the time, the way a firm is deselected is that they're just not getting new work, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you get deselected. Now, if you're on the law firm side and you see those cases dwindling and dwindling and dwindling, it's not that Campbell Soup isn't getting sued anymore. Okay, they still are getting sued. It's just that you're not getting the work, and you need to be asking that question and being proactive to ask why is that not happening, right? Has there been a significant change in your business model, right? Or whatever it is, we're not seeing any new cases. And ultimately that just dwindles down to nothing, and then there's an alternative. So I think that's the most common way. Certainly there are circumstances that Reese points out where firms have been found in violation of these, guidelines repeatedly, or have exceedingly high rates of reduction on their bills over a consistent period of time that just aren't being corrected. And that has to be addressed. But for the most part, firms get deselected. And I think that's what this question is getting at.
Yeah.
Kath, if I can just add and build on that a bit. For me, I can't recall an instance in which a firm was fired because of billing guidelines, unless it was a trust issue or really went to performance. This is just a symptom, and I have a great deal of empathy for law firms that have to manage not one but thousands of sets of billing guidelines and try to comply. The more practical response is you just don't get paid for stuff that you billed incorrectly, and that leads to a lot of non-productive time down the road trying to figure out what the right amount is. Reese said yesterday in our call, you may have a firm on 20 different matters as well, and you're not going to fire them over one matter because you want them productive on the other 19 as well. Again, it just goes to having a dialogue with the firm, making sure that there's clarity of expectations. But I think the question to some extent is a bit of a red herring, because it's not the billing guidelines. It's basically the other KPI that really matter.
Yeah. I'm going to suggest to Brad that we move on, as I think everyone's, I hope, beginning to appreciate these things really reinforce one another. It's not so much about the billing guidelines, as Joe was just saying, but rather the feedback about performance that's of vital importance here. So on to the next polling question, the next and last. This is similar to the last, but it's different a little bit, right? We're asking about communications about goals, expectations, and measures of success at the outset of new matters.
Right. So the last question was largely about like annual reviews, that sort of thing. And this is really about, do you set expectations at the, when the matter commences?
Debbie, if you're seeing diminishing response, then why don't you go ahead and check? There we are. 60% say yes. Oh, it's a sophisticated group.
Yeah, so again, similar to the last response of this group, and sort of, I think, generally way better than what's out there. This was an interesting, an interesting piece of data that we collected. If you read the legal press, law firms are focusing a whole lot on deploying technology to aid to deliver legal services more effectively and cost efficiently to their clients. And when we asked the law firms, are you doing that? 83% said that they are doing that. When we asked the law departments, are your law firms doing that? Again, about 50-50. So law firms think they are doing a way better job at deploying technology effectively on behalf of their clients than the clients themselves think.
Brad, you had a interesting question, I think, in the LDO survey around innovation that was very similar, and there was a similar gap around the innovation gap about whether firms thought they were being innovative or whether they thought they were using technology, which is very similar to this. And I think this comes down to, a lot of times, if the firms are doing something that is having a material, impact or adding value to the engagement, they should be communicating that to the clients, because either what they're doing is not impressing the client and it's just kind of considered table stakes by the client, or they're not, communicating to the client the value that they're deriving from it, right? So I think that's part of the problem.
I think that's right, Bob, and I think it's not just communicating the value from it. A different piece of research that I worked on over the past year was this captive ALSP survey, where we uncovered that 35 of the AmLaw 100 law firms have some sort of captive ALSP operation within their firm. And every time I presented that to a group of in-house people or quoted that number for in-house people, the response was the same, which was, well, that means that some of our firms must be in that group, and why haven't they told us about it? Why do if I'm in-house, how do I not know that our firms have these offerings? And that's pervasive. So like, it's funny, for all the marketing by press release out there, there's not nearly as much like having the engagement partner sit down with the client and say, we have this new offering, are you interested? So please do that.
Well, and I wonder if that's about firms who have those are using them for their internal operations, perhaps, or some of their internal administrative work, or it's just not work, it's just not the work that's actually being passed on to the client, which again goes back to well, hold on, if you have this, then why don't you use it for some of my work too? But again, and just like the words legal ops, right? Everybody's like, we've got legal ops. Well, what kind? What flavor? What type? What are they doing? And I think that's the same with ALSPs. We got ALSPs, right? Great. Are they doing your accounting? I don't care about that as an in-house client. I wonder if that was a difference.
No, so in the captive ALSP report, we tested pretty clearly to make sure that that the responses were about doing client
work
within those tools. But I think broadly speaking, your point is correct, right? Like, I think there's a lot of instances where where a firm brings in some internal technology to aid efficiency within the firm, and then like answers yes to this question, right? When the clients don't feel that at all. So I think I think
Right.
that's a separate point, but equally valid.
Brad, did you discern in your queries what kind of work the firms were doing through their ALSPs?
We did, and it was a good chunk of it, but not. And I don't have that data in front of me. I haven't looked at it in a little bit, Pat. But a lot of it was, doc review type work, but not as much as you'd think. Like, not very few of those firms were only doing like discovery doc review type work within their captive LSP. A handful were, but the things you'd expect, contract review, some IP services. I'll send you. I don't think I could find the link in time to put it in the chat here, but I can maybe ask Debbie or Catherine to circulate the link to download the report. It's all in there.
Thanks.
Do we have one more finding to just share before, and then we can just sit back and have a more robust and complete conversation, Brad?
Yeah, and it's sort of the all-encompassing question. Measuring the value of legal services is more art than science. Both sides largely agree that measuring the value of legal services is more art than it is science. And I don't know if we want to talk about this specifically. I know that some folks, I personally I would have answered science, but I'm obviously in the minority. And Chris, maybe I'll kick this to you because you and I have talked about this a lot. It seems, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say, look, I think I get why the responses are the way they are. I too would like to see this go to more of a data-driven type of approach, but it's just really hard. And I know a lot of people on this Zoom have tried. I've worked with many of you who have. Just really, really hard to do. So I think it's still an evolution, and I hope we see over time more people believe it is a little more science than art. But I just think it's really hard to do. It's very complicated once you get into the details of this.
Well, and here I would like to hear, I think, some in-house perspective because of the old adage about beauty being in the eye of the beholder. And I realize that this is something that we could be talking about at different levels, but like ACC value champions, of course, an example near and dear to my heart. It's not value, but we do, those that compete and win on that, compete on three metrics: cutting costs, improving the predictability of spending, which is inherently valuable as well, improving outcomes, which can be process outcomes, right? Making things go faster, take fewer touches, as well as legal outcomes. Sam Ranganathan, who's a fellow elect and joined us today, is the most recent value champion who really moved the needle on improving diversity on the matters at the company where he works at AbbVie. So I'd love to hear, and I think others with law firms would love to hear from Bob and Reese and Joe, both Joes, on value. Joe Milkoff, you're off mute. I'm going to take that as an indication.
Well, yeah, I think it goes back to what Bob Taylor said at the beginning. It's kind of this substantive law versus the business dichotomy. And I would tell you, I think probably our firms all do a real nice job on the substantive law. So that is art in a sense. Like, what you did to effectively prosecute or defend a case is art at its apex, kind of. But to every point you've been making there, Karen, like, we run a business. We want to have predictable legal fees. I need to be able to tell my CFO that, hey, this is what we think we're going to spend for the entire next fiscal year. And that's really hard for a lawyer to try to predict. But one of the key pieces there, we haven't talked a lot about this, but it's in Sam's comment here about the hourly model. I mean, it's surprising to me how hard it is still to break some of the firms away from that to go to an AFA. And we just had this conversation with one of the firms that's handling a couple cases for us, and that's probably where the relationship's going to stop, because that relationship partner said, we just don't want to do AFAs. And we know you have other firms can do your work, and so be it. But that's our answer to that too, is we just can't run a business that has no idea what those, what those fees may be on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm. Bob, you're nodding, but you're not off mute. Did you want to, you're just agreeing, or do you have more to say?
Well, I certainly agree with Joe.
Mhm.
And I would just add this, that, and, at the risk of being Captain Obvious here, in-house operations are pushing themselves towards practicing data-driven law more and more every single day, every single year. And I know law firms don't love hearing this, but your cases typically are looked at on a portfolio basis. Yes, there are those cases that are unique and unicorn and individual, and those bet the company cases, but the standard cases, the ones that we see most often, are being looked at on a portfolio basis, and those portfolios are matched up against a set of metrics that Joe is referring to on how they run their business and what's important to them. So what their in-house folks are doing, and providers are helping in-house folks to do, is to make data-driven decisions around that portfolio of work, so you can make better decisions faster that lead to better outcomes. And so for me, I tend to agree probably more with Brad that there's more science being applied here than art. It doesn't mean that there isn't art to lawyering. I'm not suggesting that there isn't, but what I'm saying on balance, that every single year that goes by, we're going to see more data-driven decisions being made, not only by in-house, but by law firms, and the way these portfolios of work are handled.
Yeah. Could I just connect to that with a point with regard to the last finding about technology and, the disconnect there? There's, to Bob's point about data to improve decision-making, there's a technology component of that too. And law firms who are deploying their technology to make their own lawyers more efficient, but not deploying technology necessarily on the client's behalf, are missing an opportunity to help the clients have a more technology-enabled, data-informed legal service practice that, by the way, if you're the firm providing that platform or portal, is going to be more sticky to you. So these things are all connected. It enables the feedback loop that you need. As I see Lucy nodding, I mean, she was a value champion for having used a very data-driven approach to identify which clauses in contracts were effective and ineffective at preventing disputes. And I'm sure I'm mashing it, Lucy, but it is. I hope, people can see now the opportunity across these, through all these findings, to put it all together. You want feedback, you want to be, more embedded with the client. And I think the technology and data that Bob was just talking about are key ways to do that, there's some unredeemed opportunity there to improve value, the art of it, through those techniques.
I think, Catherine, what you're saying is, it's all 100% correct, and we're all in violent agreement. That's the beauty of these kind of panels. We are all in absolute violent agreement. The reality is that there's a matchmaking that needs to happen between the law firms that get it and have the capabilities to deliver on it, and the in-house team that gets it and has the capability to consume services in a different and modern way. Mm-hmm. That's a reality. And that doesn't always happen. When it does, it's magical, right? And that's where value champs come, and you see the magic. And we've lived, those of us who've lived it, we know, we're like, okay, if it was that lawyer with that kind of ops person at that firm matched to, right, that lawyer who manages that work in-house with ops support in-house, and it's true magic when it happens.
Right.
But it is still a teeny tiny minority of the profession and the industry and the billions that flow between it, right? So yeah. That's you have to have the matches. You really do. And we're seeing a lot, in the chat about, and I didn't mention, it's easy to pick on firms. It's super easy to pick on firms, but there's a bunch of in-house people. I deal with them daily, and I'm like, hey, how about we get them to do this? I'm looking at their law firm spend and the names of the law firms. I'm like, I know all of these. Let's go. Let's talk to them. And I'm like, well, we don't want to scare, right? So it's, and that's, I think that was a revelation that I had a couple of years ago, or just super easy to pick on firms, but
Yeah.
it's the legal profession, not as much, the business model is a mess at the law firms, we know for sure, but it's also the legal profession, and no magical transformation happens with a lot of lawyers who come from firms to in-house, and that's the bulk of where we all start. So matchmaking. Yes,
Matchmaking, it's a really powerful point. And I want to just call attention to a point that Michael Mills made in the chat, which may sound like a bit of a disconnect, but bear with me. He's suggesting that maybe more communications training in law firms and in-house would be helpful. And I think that he may have not been addressing that matchmaking point, but let's just acknowledge that if you're not asking, if you're not demanding, if you in the law firm asking for the feedback, how can I get better? If you're not in the legal department saying, hey, can't you do more for me? I need more data. I would like some tech enablement. Then that matchmaking can't occur, right? And so people really need to up their game on both sides in that constructive communication piece.
And one other thing I think is important, especially around this question of value, is that I think that it's really common to measure value in terms of cost and hours. I'm not really talking about the hourly bill as much as that the value of the work is determined based upon the number of hours that it takes someone to do the work. And I think that happens on both sides, right? So if you're a law firm and you leverage technology and process effectively, you should be able to use an alternative fee arrangement and make more money. And a lot of clients don't like that. Like, it bothers them. Like, oh, we didn't get such a good deal because the firm made more money than they used to make, even though you might have saved half of what you used to spend. And there's like some competitive nature around the hours that is, I think, really damaging. That makes this really hard, that they're focused on how good a deal we got, and not what the value that was provided to them. I think that's really an important mind constraint that people are facing.
Yeah, the wrong metric, right? Hours. I think that's another thing many of us can violently agree on. Hey, I need to acknowledge that it's 2 minutes before the top of the hour, and so obviously more opportunity for conversation wanted. So that's what the college is doing. We have, a series through the Futures Forum, as well as the Futures Conference coming up in October. But thank you so much to all of the people who now have their cameras on, who sort of prepared to share these findings and discuss them, as well as all the rest of you who joined us today. Robust engagement in the chat. And so all of this is going to be circulating. The recording is going to be shared along with the slides, and Debbie has offered also that she can share element. I don't know, Debbie, if you can share the entire chat, I think that would be great, but excerpted to the links that were shared, I think that would be fine. I don't think anyone would object, right, to all of this being shared among the people who've attended, or at least maybe perhaps registered. When you do receive the recording, there's an evaluation form there. Please fill it out. It's really important to the College of Law Practice Management to understand what's going well with these sessions so that we can continue to improve. And lastly, please mark your calendar if you're interested in a session on business development, a related topic here. That would be on September 22nd at 3 p.m. Central. And I think that's it. Debbie, did I cover it all?
That should do it for today.
I'm sorry, I'd just like to add that if you want to download the full legal pricing and project management survey report, it's at lppmsurvey.com, or you could use the handy dandy QR code that should be on your screen.
Yeah, truly what we've talked a bit about today is a small fraction. So there's a ton of interesting information there. So thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed the conversation, and hope to see you soon.